Take a close look at this picture because the secret isn't in the center. It's hiding in the background, half covered by shadow, where a woman holding a child was left just visible enough to be forgotten. And once you notice her, this stops being a family portrait and starts feeling like evidence. That's the part that stayed with me because on the surface, the image looked exactly like what you'd expect from a wealthy family at the end of the 19th century. A polished lawn, fine clothes, parents posed like they owned not just the house behind them, but the entire world around it. 2 daughters in pale dresses, a little boy standing front and center like the future had already been reserved for him. It was the kind of portrait meant to say, everything is proper here. Everything is in its place. Everything is secure. But off to the side, half swallowed by the shadows of a tree, stood a black woman holding a baby. And once I saw her, I couldn't unsee her. The image came to me in the summer of 2026 when a preservation specialist named Nora Ellison was asked to restore a damaged glass print for a historical archive in New Haven, Connecticut. The old photograph had been donated as part of a respectable family collection, the kind of material archivists get all the time. Formal portraits, ledgers, letters, nothing outwardly sensational. The family in the image was identified as the Fairchilds of Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, photographed in 1898 on the grounds of their townhouse garden. The notes listed the father, Edwin Fairchild, the mother, Louise, their daughters Helen and Beatrice, and a 6-year-old boy named Charles, described as a nephew taken in after a family tragedy. That was the official version. It might have stayed the official version too if the damage to the photograph hadn't forced Nora to enlarge the shadows. That's where everything changed. She started the way conservators always do. Slow, careful, patient. She scanned. The image, at high resolution, cleaned up streaking from water damage, corrected fading, balanced contrast, and began teasing out details that had nearly vanished. The further she pushed into the darker edge of the garden, the more the shape under the tree stopped looking like a blotch and started looking like a person, not a garden statue. Not a trick of light. A woman. She wore plain working clothes, the kind domestic staff might have worn in that era. Her posture was upright, almost stubbornly so. She was not wandering into frame by accident. She was placed there, visible but easy to ignore. And in her arms, wrapped in pale fabric, was an infant. Nora later said that what shook her wasn't just the woman's presence. It was her expression. There was grief in it, yes. But something else too, something harder, something like a person insisting quietly but absolutely that she had a right to be seen. That detail alone would have been enough to spark questions, but then Nora looked back at the boy in the center of the Fairchild family. The resemblance to Edwin Fairchild was impossible to miss once she really sat with it. The jaw, the eyes, the shape of the mouth. And suddenly the story attached to the image, orphaned nephew, dead relatives, family duty, started to feel less like truth and more like cover. By the end of that first evening, Nora was no longer just restoring an old photograph. She was investigating a lie. The archive's curator, May Livingston, gave her access to the rest of the donated material. Household books, private correspondence, bills, social invitations, boring things usually. Except boring things are exactly where families bury the truth. In a household ledger from 1898, Nora found wages paid to a woman named Viola Green, listed as cook and upstairs maid. The payments began in 1896 and ended abruptly in late 1899. Beside the final entry was one short note written in a tighter hand than the rest. Released. That word did not sit right. Then came the letters. One from Louise Fairchild to a cousin in Baltimore, written in the spring of 1898, made Nora stop cold. Louise wrote that the household had weathered certain unkind talk, and that the child Charles would henceforth be raised as family, which is the only arrangement compatible with decency and future standing. She insisted the matter should not be discussed further. That tone told Nora more than the sentence itself. Families only write like that when they are trying to push dirt under a rug that keeps lifting at the corners. By then, Nora had a working theory. Viola Green had worked in the Fairchild household. She had a son. The son became Charles Fairchild, the so-called nephew. The wealthy family rewrote his place in the tree before anyone outside their circle could ask too many questions. But that still left the baby in Viola's arms. And it still left the deeper question. Why keep the photograph at all? If the family wanted the truth erased, why preserve the evidence? The next breakthrough came from church records in Philadelphia. A baptism entry from 1892 listed a boy named Charles Green, son of Viola Green. Not Fairchild. Green. The record also included sponsors from the church's black congregation, which meant the child had begun life publicly connected to his mother's community before being folded into the white family's story. That alone was explosive. But the real wound opened in a letter Nora found in a pastor's correspondence file written by Viola herself in late 1899. It was one of those documents that hits harder because the language is so restrained. She wrote that the family who employed her had decided her continued presence in the house was no longer suitable. She wrote that her son had been told he belonged with the Fairchilds, that he would have better prospects there, that his mother should be grateful for the arrangement. She wrote that she had no money to challenge them, no social power, no standing to the courts, would honor over a wealthy white household. And then she wrote the line Nora never forgot. What kind of mother am I if I fight and lose him? And what kind of mother am I if I let them keep him? That was the real story. Not scandal in the juicy sense, tragedy in the ordinary American sense. Power deciding what counted as family and what did not. Still, the timeline didn't fit the baby. If Charles was born in 1892, he would have been 6 in the 1898 photograph, which matched the boy in the center. So who was the infant Viola held in the shadows? That question gnawed at Nora until she went back through maternity hospital records from 1898. There, after 2 long days and more than a few dead ends, she found another birth entry. Viola Green again, this time delivering a girl in May of that year. The father's name was left blank. The fees were paid by E. Fairchild. That was the moment the entire image rearranged itself. There were 2 children connected to Viola Green. The boy in the family lineup, already absorbed into the Fairchild household, and the infant girl in Viola's arms, still hers. At least for that moment, for that one frozen second in the garden, both of her children were in the same photograph. One taken into white privilege. One still held against her chest, a son in the foreground under the family name, a daughter in the shadows under her mother's care. That's not just haunting, it's devastating. And it got worse. Records from a home for black children in New York showed an infant girl surrendered in the fall of 1898 by a mother named Viola Green. Healthy, adoption pending, a donation had accompanied the placement, large enough to be noted. Within weeks, the child was gone into another household, the trail sealed by the kind of paperwork that was designed to disappear poor women and make it all sound benevolent. So yes, the Fairchilds took one child and arranged away the other. And yet they allowed the photograph to exist. That bothered Nora almost as much as the separation itself. Why leave behind proof? Why keep a portrait that contained this much danger? The only answer that made sense was the strangest one. Someone wanted the truth to survive, even if only as a whisper. Maybe Edwin. Maybe Louise. Maybe even Viola herself insisted on standing there. Whatever happened, the final image became a compromise between erasure and memory. She would not stand with the family, but she would be in the frame. She would hold her daughter. Her son would be visible. The facts would be split, but not entirely destroyed. Nora's search for Charles led her into a different century. As an adult, Charles Fairchild became a lawyer in Philadelphia. Successful, respected, publicly white. That much fit the rewritten life he had been given. But then Nora found his later work. Housing discrimination cases, school integration fights, quiet financial support for black civic groups. By the 1940s and 1950s, he had become known, somewhat strangely for a man of his social background, as someone willing to spend his own reputation on racial justice. It felt personal. And it was. Charles's grandson, Daniel Fairchild, was living in Princeton when Nora finally tracked him down. Daniel taught African American studies, which already told Nora something was going on inside the family memory. When she explained what she had found, he didn't sound shocked. Not exactly. More like someone hearing a locked door click open. He invited her over and showed her a sealed letter written by Charles near the end of his life. It had been left with instructions to open only after Charles's son had died. Daniel had opened it years earlier and had been quietly trying to make sense of it ever since. The letter confirmed everything. Charles wrote that he was not the nephew he had been told he was. He was Viola Green's son and Edwin Fairchild's child. He wrote that Viola came to him as an adult and showed him his baptism record, old letters, and a cropped photograph of herself holding his infant sister beneath a tree. At first, he thought it was impossible. Then he started comparing records, memories, and dates, and the whole false story collapsed. He spent the last years of Viola's life visiting her in secret, learning who she was, learning what had been taken from both of them. He wrote that his legal work on behalf of black families came directly from understanding what had been done to his own mother. And then there was the daughter. Viola had never found her. Charles spent years trying to locate her, but he died without success. That could have been the end of it. Painful, important, unfinished. But once the photograph was exhibited publicly, once the story reached newspapers and historians and genealogy circles, another family came forward. A woman in Harlem named Evelyn Brooks said her grandmother had been adopted from a New York children's home in late 1898. She had grown up with a tiny cropped photograph of a black woman holding a baby in a garden. No white family in the frame, just the mother and child. That single cropped print was everything. It meant someone had made a second version. Someone had cut away the Fairchilds and preserved only Viola with her daughter. An act of mercy, maybe. Or guilt. Or both. Either way, it gave the adopted line something priceless. A face. A witness. A proof of love. DNA and document work eventually confirmed what the photograph had already been trying to say all along. Charles and that daughter, renamed in adoption and lost to official history, were siblings. Their descendants had been living separate racial lives for more than a century, one branch passing through whiteness and its protections, the other living openly black through segregation, discrimination, work, teaching, organizing, and all the ordinary courage that America demanded from black families. That is what makes the photograph so much bigger than one family secret. It captures the machinery of race in a single frame. A mother in the shadows. A son absorbed into whiteness, a daughter on the verge of disappearance, a patriarch at the center, a respectable family face presented to the world, and beneath all of it, the truth, still breathing. What gets me is that Viola Green somehow made herself impossible to erase completely. She did not control the money, the documents, the legal standing, or the story told in drawing rooms, but she got herself into that image. She got both of her children into that image. She left a visual record that outlived the people who tried to redefine her life. That matters, more than I can really say. When Nora and the descendants finally stood together at Viola's grave in Philadelphia, they brought copies of the restored image. The full one, the cropped one, the son, the daughter, the mother finally seen in the same story. They replaced her plain marker with one that named her not as servant, not as domestic, not as scandal, but as what she had always been. Beloved mother. That phrase feels small beside what she carried, but maybe that's the point. History steals in grand ways, but sometimes repair has to happen in simple words. The restored photograph now hangs in a permanent exhibit. Visitors stop first at the White family. That's still how the eye has been trained. Then they notice Viola. Then the baby. Then they read the story and understand that the center of the image was never really the center at all. It was her. The woman in the shadows. The one they nearly lost. The one who made sure they didn't.